Well, g'day everybody. It's Benjamin Morgan, Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia. And wow, we've actually had quite a few videos that we've put out this week. So I do apologise that everyone's got to see a great deal of me on a number of issues, which we're putting forward some fairly firm and clear advocacy on topics that are incredibly relevant to our general aviation industry at this time. And speaking of things that are entirely relevant to our industry at this time, we've just had our annual general meeting for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And following on from that, we have welcomed 4 new directors to AOPA, each come to the association with a great deal of experience and are no doubt going to be invaluable as we progress through this next 12-month run. Now, we're going to have an opportunity over the next week and a half to meet each and every one of those directors and to have a one-on-one conversation. And throughout the conversation, I certainly do invite you all to submit any questions that you may have into the comments, and I'll try and bring them up on screen and give each of the directors that we do this interview process with the opportunity to respond directly to you so you can get to know them a little bit better. Now, added to that, one of the outcomes of the annual general meeting, which has just been this last few weeks, is that we'll also be setting up in the coming week a calendar for state-based AOPA Australia town hall meetings. Now, what's this all about? A town hall meeting with AOPA is going to be an opportunity for pilots and aircraft owners, aviation businesses, and people across the industry to participate in a live meeting process in which you'll be able to not only ask questions, you'll be able to register to speak to a particular issue that you might be passionate about within the aviation industry that you believe needs a focus of advocacy and some awareness or some action being taken. And this is part of a much larger plan for AOPA to try and open up the doors somewhat and let people see what's going on underneath the hood with respect to our national advocacy agenda, so that you all have a much better idea of the work that we're doing Monday through to Friday on behalf of you all in general aviation. So without really speaking too much about that, we'll get into a little bit more with Clinton. This evening, we are joined by Clinton McKenzie. Now, Clinton has joined us on previous live streams and has been a person in the general aviation industry that I personally have gone to on a whole multitude of issues over the last few years when researching particular issues and particular topics. And he's a fantastic knowledge base, and as someone who's really passionate about general aviation and has some very strong views about what we need to be doing to get this industry back on its wheels, so to speak, and running. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome Clinton to this evening's broadcast. G'day, Clinton.
G'day, Ben, and g'day everyone watching. Good to be here. You probably need a bit of a break from your voice videos. The number that you put out in the last few days have been quite extensive, so I'll try and take a bit of that load off you.
Mate, you're more than welcome for that, Clinton. But look, I really do thank you for joining us for this particular broadcast. This is a great medium for people to get to know the people that are involved in AOPA. Of course, everyone gets to see me so often, and I think one of the things from the AGM this year was really saying to the board, hey, how about each and every one of you take an opportunity to get behind the camera and to speak to the issues that you think are important. So maybe the best place for us to start the broadcast tonight is for you to give everybody a bit of a background on who you are, what's your aviation experience, what got you involved in it, the organisations you've been working for, because they are very relevant to today's conversations as well. And from there, we might just start throwing some questions up and we'll just let the conversation roll.
Sure, Ben. Well, I don't know what it was, but I'm one of these people who was born with aviation in his blood. I left home at the age of 15 to join the Air Force as an apprentice, to play with aeroplanes and ultimately to be a fighter pilot if I could. But unfortunately, the eye standards were such that I couldn't become a pilot in the Air Force. So I did my private pilot's license back in 1986 and I joined AOPA then. I've been a member of AOPA for 36 years, other than a short hiatus when I thought I had a conflict of interest for reasons that will become obvious. So I spent 20 years in the Air Force, and a lot of that up to my elbows in complicated flying machinery, avionics, navigation systems, but at the same time flying privately. Because I couldn't pursue my number one aspiration, I recall the advice of the career advocates at my school when I left at year 10, and they said, you should be a doctor or a lawyer. And I said, no, I want to go and play with aeroplanes. But I then started studying law part-time at the Australian National University as a mature age student. And because I was a mature age student, I did straight law. I did 38 points of straight law, which is more law than the normal students had to study. And I loved it. And I was actually disappointed when it was over. And I managed to jag first class honours. And I thought, well, I'll start a career as an unemployed lawyer. But the rest after that was 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, 378 days a week work as a lawyer, which surprised me because I could never understand how lawyers got work. And my first gig was in the Office of Legal Counsel in the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. So I spent a couple of years in there. But again, because of my background, and it was quite unique in the sense of a law degree, pretty good law degree, aviation expertise, aircraft maintenance engineer expertise, that I got selected for the job of General Manager, General Aviation Operations. So that was when I was a General Aviation GMGAO. I had a hiatus in my AOPA membership because I thought there was a bit of a conflict of interest there.
A little.
But anyway, I couldn't stand it anymore. It was not a job that I enjoyed. I could see where CASA was going, and my predictions were correct. So I made the second best career decision of my life, and that was to leave CASA. And I actually ended up in private practice in a very large law firm. I was in private practice in the government law team, doing Commonwealth law for 10 years, practicing with some of the best in the Commonwealth game. People like, and this won't make too much sense to you, but Alan Rose, Pat Brazel were erstwhile secretaries of the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department. Emeritus Professor Dennis Pearce, whose CV, Professor Robin Craig, the cream of the Commonwealth lawyer crop. So I went into that environment. I was very, very lucky to get into that environment. And then I ended up becoming a partner for 5 years in that private law firm. So I was there for 10 years and learned a lot, including, when you know a lot about something, when you realise how little you know about it. But practicing with those people taught me a lot. And then after 10 years, I thought I'll try something different. And I went over to what I call the SANE Commonwealth Transport Safety Authority. That's the AMSA, and went in there and ended up as the general counsel, the head lawyer in there. Fantastic organisation, a fantastic team of people, and again, learning a lot about the law. And I was there 10 years, and once I run out of fingers to count, I think I decided I needed to go off and have a rest, and this is my third go at trying to retire. Now, I should say, some people who know me and occasionally bail me up say, "Well, you're a CASA stooge. You were working in CASA. It's it's people like yours' fault." And I'll say a couple of things in my defence. First, I wasn't in the standards division. That had nothing to do with regulatory reform. And secondly, I was in CASA in my 30s. I'm now in my 60s. The vast majority of my aeronautic, I should say through that, I'm an aircraft owner through a company. I've got a hangar at an aerodrome through a company at Cootamundra. I'm a refugee from the Canberra airport, but all of that's happened after I left CASA. The vast majority of my aeronautical experience and legal experience is after I've left CASA. Most of my aircraft maintenance engineering stuff was before I joined CASA. So since I've left CASA, I've grown up and I've learnt a lot about aviation and aviation regulation from different perspectives. And I'm just at the view that the regulatory reform program is an expensive disaster. AvMed is out of control. They are responsible for harmful overreaction to objective risks. My view is they're now a force inimical to aviation safety, because so many people I talk to say they don't bother telling their DAME stuff anymore, and some of them are too scared to even talk to a doctor about some of the issues and concerns they have, for fear that it will get back to AVMED, and AVMED will go on its crusade to intrude, restrict, destroy, or whatever. And because I actually understand aviation in the real world, that worries me, and it's got to be fixed. There's got to be a recalibration to get back to when AVMED understood the proper role of medical certification in a system of safety, aviation safety. The other thing is airports. The degradation and destruction of airport infrastructure in the face of what the Airport Act says, and I could talk to you through. I'll go back and go on to first principles and why all this stuff's happening. And when you look at the Airports Act, my view is it must have been drafted by the work experience kid in Office of Parliamentary Counsel, because it's lovely. It's got all these lovely objects in it, but it's got so many loopholes in it. And as we know, those loopholes are being airport owners are driving Mack trucks through those loopholes, literally sometimes to park their Mack trucks in the freight hub that they set up. And I think that the outcome of degradation and destruction of airport infrastructure is a complete perversion of what the Airports Act originally intended was supposed to happen with these publicly owned assets, and pillaging them in the interests of private and individual profits is not what the original aim of the Airports Act was. So I could, and I can talk about ASICs as well. So I suppose the skills that I bring is I actually have a good insight into how the Commonwealth actually works inside. I understand the law, I understand the regulatory regime each time I try to delve into it, and I shake my head in despair when I do that. But I'm good at myth busting. I mean, AOPA has very little leverage ultimately, because there are so few people and in the aviation industry, and they're dispersed across the country, so they don't have too much political clout. But if you're going to fight, you need to know who to fight with. So, for example, as you and I know, and many people will know, ASIC is the creation of an organisation other than CASA. You got to work out who actually administers the ASIC legislation. It's now the Department of Home Affairs, as you know. But the number of people who say to me, "We're going to argue with CASA about ASICs," and I go, "No, don't waste your finite energy on doing that. The organisation that we've got to have that argument with is the Department of Home Affairs, the area in the Home Affairs, and make an argument to them." Naturally, CAS is very happy to data mine all of the stuff that we give to the ASIC people in that process, and that worries me with all these data breaches. You may recall when I said a couple of DAME's visits ago, the photo that I'd sent to the ASIC issuers was on his computer in the MRS system. And how did that get there? Well, obviously it's been shared with CASA, and each time our data gets shared, there's an increase in the risk of it getting leaked or hacked, a geometric increase. So we've got to know who to argue with. Part 43, I looked at the draft Part 43 and shook my head in it and saw instantly basic flaws in it. And so we've got to focus on getting our energies on focusing in on the key points and arguing with the right people with them, because if we don't do that, our finite energy is wasted. Cap 43B, you recall a while ago I wrote about some dangerously unsupported twaddle in Cap 43B that I said I suggested people do not follow because it, in my view, created actual risks for people filling out, putting in a clearing endorsement column, something wasn't a clearing endorsement. And the bizarre aspect about that was I wrote to someone very, 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 very senior in CASA about my concerns about that. And I got a response in a phone call saying, Clinton, I agree with you. 95% of what you say. I think that we should have another column in the maintenance release. Oh, okay. Well, in any event, at the moment, it's a problem. And so then I didn't hear anything. And then I chased it up. And then I get back an email from someone else in the organisation saying, no, it's all fine. You're wrong. And I'm going, what on earth? How can it be that you've got this very, very senior person agreeing with me because I'm right? All you've got to do is read the legislation to know I'm right. And someone else, some drone from Sector 7G, is given the task of responding. Oh, no, we're not going to change it. And that same crap, dangerous crap, is still in there. So I want to focus on trying to pick the eyes when there's something that is patently wrong, to fight that, because in other circumstances, if we're arguing with the wrong person over trivia, then it's wasted energy. So that's what I want to try and focus on. Help AOPA focus on, well, if you want to have this argument, this is the area of the organisation or the department that's got portfolio responsibility is Department X in that organisation. And you're working your way through this slowly, trying to figure out who's running airports. We know nobody. Where's ASIC from? All this sort of stuff.
Well, Clinton, why don't this might be a good juncture that what we might do is we might just take a deeper dive into some of these issues, and we might just pull it back to some of the coverage that we've generated. Before we do that, though, I just want to roll back to a comment you made about organisations like AOPA in the industry. The industry bodies and associations are in many respects are powerless. That is correct to a degree, but we're also living in an interesting time where we have the enormity of strength in communication via social media. We're able to communicate a message today in a way in which we never previously were able to do. We can produce a live content video. We can broadcast that via Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we can drive those communications to key people right across the industry and right across the political spectrum. And I know from the videos I've done this past week, and you and I spoke earlier, and you said, Ben, you must have had a tough week. You were probably right, Clinton. It has been a tough week because it's gotten to a point now where we've tried the engagement, we've tried to work with them, we've tried to support them, and we're getting fed bullshit. And it just gets to a point where you just can't keep swallowing it. And at some point, you've got to start saying, well, look, there's no other option here. We'll be calling these people out. We're going to be naming them. We're going to be chasing them down. Unfortunately, I mean, I feel sorry for the guys in the Department of Infrastructure because my eyes are on them now like never before. And I want to make sure that politicians understand that these people in this department are just either completely asleep at the wheel or are incompetent on a scale that can't even be imagined. It's insane. So we do have a strength. And if we sharpen that communication, and I think the message that I think you're trying to convey there is being able to double down that communication with a real articulation of the law and a real articulation of what is right, then it can only get better and better. And so I see that as our strength, and it's something that I think we should be very proud of. We've built it up over the last 5 years. I think when I started at AOPA, we had an online social presence of around 400 followers. We're just short of 9,000 now. I think the largest Australian social group is around 12 to 13,000. We're only just behind it. We've a little bit more work to do. And with the help of all of our viewers, our members, we certainly can get there. So the issues this week, and the first one I'd like to hit you with is Canberra Airport. I did a video on the absolute nonsense that is going on at that airport, the shortening of the runway, the displacement of runway 12 threshold by 360 metres. What's driving it is property development. They've tried to dress it. They've tried to dress the donkey up as everything but a donkey, but it is a donkey. It's all about property development. And it's incredibly sad that our Department of Infrastructure just putting their hands in the air and saying, oh, previous minister approved a master plan, so we don't have to do anything. And I guess the community's frustration, Clinton, sits around the fact that these airports are Commonwealth land. They bypass all local council protections. The local councils, in many respects, don't agree with these types of developments and would actually serve to try and stop it, but they can't. The Commonwealth body that's responsible for oversighting is the Department of Infrastructure, and we've already heard this week from Phil McClure via his letter, and Jake Sullivan, and I think, what did I call Phil McClueless this week, because his letter was just a cut and paste of absolute nonsense. It explained nothing other than to sweep the issue off the desk and to say, not my problem. So your thoughts on Canberra Airport, where's that going? What options do we have?
Yeah. Well, look, when you started by saying we're on the threshold of, I thought you said you were going to say vertiports. And next, pretty soon we're going to just be cruising around in electric
maybe.
Drones, pretty soon. Get the regs in place first. Now, well, Canberra Airport, of course, I'm a refugee from Canberra Airport. And talking about people from the department, I recall the person responsible for the administration of the Act, the Airports Act, in front of either Senate estimates or the CASA inquiry, and I just laughed. She would have made Pollyanna look like a pessimist. She said, airport operators have an interest in having a positive, friendly relationship with the aviation users and tenants. And I just laughed, because airport operators have an incentive to have a completely acrimonious and negative relationship with all of the people on the airport that are getting in the way. All those pesky people who are trying to sell aircraft parts and in hangars and aeroplanes, all of this stuff is an irritation to them. And they want them gone, which is what most of people have done. Because I couldn't afford to pay $14,000 a year to park my Bonanza in the one corner of a hangar that Canberra Airport didn't even build. When I learnt to fly, there were no fewer than 5 general aviation flying training organisations on Canberra Airport. They've all gone. They've all been bulldozed, literally.
And Clinton, and on that issue, and something that I hear so often, I get inundated, and I want to make this clear. You would know this. Firsthand. I get inundated with phone calls. And strangely enough, of recent, I'm actually getting inundated with phone calls from people who work at CASA, phoning me up to tell me how bad things have gotten inside there. But that's a side point. But I get inundated with phone calls on these airports issues. And there's a lot of frustration boiling. And people have been saying to me of recent, Ben, you do realise, like, the guy behind Canberra Airport, I'm not going to mention his name because I'll probably get sued. The guy behind Canberra Airport, purportedly he and his cohort acquired this airport. I've heard figures between 25 million and 60 million, but let's just say he paid between 25, 60 million. It's reported now that the principal person behind this airport is now worth over $1 billion. Now, I also heard that since acquiring Canberra Airport and this public asset, the Australian People's Airport now becoming his business play toy, he now owns a $100 million personal equestrian centre on the south coast of New South Wales. They've made that much money out of Canberra Airport. It's almost embarrassing when you start to comprehend the lifestyle the government has given these people at the cost of our industry. And I think that's what is now starting to burn and rub people so badly, is that they have made so much money out of it, and yet they are so miserable and are not prepared to even do 1/10 of what is needed to do to foster general aviation, knowing full well it can't afford what they're doing to it. There's no effort whatsoever. And it's not even like Canberra Airport in this recent announcement. They're saying, we're going to shorten your runway, GA. And we know that we're reducing aviation capability, so we're going to reduce the fees and charges that general aviation pays at the airport, because we're taking away from you so we can make many, many, many more millions of dollars out of another business park development. So we're taking your aviation industry, we're making it much smaller, we're removing your capability, we're actually removing aviation safety. And in compensation for that, we're going to build you some new facilities and make it more affordable for you to be here. They're not even doing that. It's just a wholesale money grab. It's a wholesale rape.
Well, I'll talk a bit about the Airports Act, because that's the heart of the problem, because people who are minded to make money will get out there and make money if it's lawful for them to do so, and drive back trucks through loopholes in legislation. But yeah, I did laugh at some. I'm lucky that I don't usually laugh rather than get angry at some of the justifications for the displays threshold on 1-2. And I should add, I've been flying in and out of Canberra for literally 36 years, so I know every inch of runway 1, 2, and 30, and a bit of time on 35 and 17. And they'd say, oh, there's a safety issue for the height of the roads and safety. They're worried about the safety of the people on the roads outside the airport. So, so now we're worried about their safety. So we'll displace the threshold. And I've flown over this over and over and over again over the years, even after the Majura Parkway was put in there. And also, I want to find out about these supposed movement figures and what the definitions used for the whatever stats that they're quoting about. Oh, less than one movement a day by an aircraft under 5,700 kilos.
Well, Clinton, they've been manipulated. They've been manipulated. And the other thing, and I think, I'm not sure if you're going to mention, I'm going to throw it in there for you right now, is a very large chunk of that data set was the period that they closed the runway for COVID. So there was an impact on shutting the runway down, had an impact in driving the statistics even lower, which helped them. And everyone was scratching their head at the time when I came out and publicly called it out, saying this closure is just bullshit. Why do they need to close a runway during COVID? What, the runway's somehow going to be, during COVID, the runway's so difficult for you to manage? I mean, there was something up with it from day one. Now we know they shut it down to help drive the statistics down, to help build up and justify the case that they've now presented to the Commonwealth, which is, hey, we're shortening it and it doesn't get used very often. Don't look here, look over there.
Yeah, well, 1, 2, and 30 were generally used as the runways on which training circuits were doing. Every time I've flown into Canberra in recent years, where I come through Yass or over Burrinjuck from the west, 9 times out of 10, I go down to Black Mountain Tower and do a straight-in approach to 1-2, because that's the quickest way to get me out of everybody else's way. And because of the length of 1-2, in light aircraft, if you can fly it properly, you can stop well short of runway 35 and turn off into taxiway Juliet, and that way you're not disrupting anybody else. You're just going straight in there. You're not joining a circuit. You're not in the way of 35, and that's happened 9 times out of 10 when I go in there. So but even if you accept as true that there's only one or less than one movement a day of one light aircraft, what's the safety issue for the road?
I noticed on the comments, Clinton, so on the comments of the video, and that's, I'd recommend people look at the comments when we put the videos up, read what the actual response of the industry is when people watch this and they react and they put their comments up. And I know there were pilots there that fly for RFDS and for air ambulance, and they were very open. I don't know these guys. They're very open, and they're saying, hey, hang on a minute. We were pretty much extensively using this cross runway as our primary runway for a very big period of time. You mean they're shortening it? I mean, you've got the air ambulance and RFDS guys that are using this runway. It's not just private aviators. And this is, I think, is the real affront to the way that the Canberra Airport Group have positioned all their communications. They're making out that this runway is not used by commercial operators. It's just a bunch of private guys and it's not used very often. But there was a couple of other telling things in their presentation that they gave at their sham, I'm going to call it, it's a sham consultation. Their opportunity to tell people what they're doing, regardless of what you think. At the sham consultation meeting, they interestingly said, one of the reasons we have to shorten or displace this runway is because of the mechanical turbulence. And so we're improving safety by shortening the runway so that the mechanical turbulence is not, and we've listened to your feedback. Hey, Canberra Airport, you created that turbulence by building buildings and structures that made it unsafe. Now to come back and say, we've heard your feedback, and to make the airport safe for you because we've listened, we're going to shorten your runway. I mean, it's like a slap and a punch at the same time. I mean, these people imagine this stuff.
And look, the Qantas maintenance hangar on the western side of runway 35 near the touchdown point has been creating mechanical turbulence ever since it was built, and every complaint made about safety fell on deaf ears, and all there is a note in the ERSA saying, watch out for the mechanical turbulence off the hangar. So if they were really worried about that, they need to displace the approach to runway 35, shouldn't they? No, we can't do that. But I'll just trace through the problem. Because of my legal background, I always start with primary materials, and this is what the Commonwealth Airport Act says, and I'll try to describe where it goes wrong, where it's gone wrong, and I hope not to bore people. But this is the act that applies to Canberra Airport, Jandakot, Archerfield, Barrafield, Moorabbin, Bankstown, and all the others, and there's a whole list of them that it's subject to. The objects of this act are as follows. A, to promote the sound development of civil aviation in Australia. The sound development of civil aviation in Australia.
That must include IKEA and Bunnings and DFOs. It must, Clinton, because there's been a lot of that. Of that.
Civil aviation doesn't say high capacity regular public transport. Civil aviation, and we know where civil aviation starts, and even military aviation. A lot of light aircraft, little people in little aeroplanes learning how to fly. Us nobodies. B, to establish a system for the regulation of airports that has due regard to the interests of airport users and the general community. So these objects make perfect sense. And to a member of public and someone in civil aviation, they look at that and go, wow, this is great. This is going to taste good. So then you go down to, and it gets better ostensibly. You go down to section 32, and 32 is headed, airport operator company must not carry on non-airport business. Airport operator company must not carry on non-airport business. And this is an offence provision. It's an offence to breach this provision. But then you read it, and it says an airport operator company for an airport other than a joint user airport. So Canberra is now no longer a joint user airport, hasn't been since 2000. All of the GA aerodromes, the GAP aerodromes, the old GAP aerodromes aren't joint user, must not carry on substantial trading or financial activities other than, and then there's a list of activities. Activities relating to the operation and or development of the airport. Now, people would look at that and go, well, that makes sense. I'll just for a bit of entertainment, when I see and/or in legislation, I'm reminded of a very famous judgment of a judge in the United States. Then this is what he said. It is manifest that we are confronted with the task of first construing, quote, and/or, unquote, that befuddling, nameless thing, that Janus-faced verbal monstrosity, neither word nor phrase, the child of a brain, of someone too lazy or too dull to express his precise meaning, or too dull to know what he did mean. And it gets pretty, it goes on, right? So as soon as I said, this is the only piece of Commonwealth legislation, primary legislation at least, and I can't recall it, where I've seen that Janice faced verbal monstrosity in there. But let's just say activities relating to the operation and development of the airport. Now, that'd sound good, but there are words missing from it. It should have said activities relating to the operation and development of the airport as an airport. Now, the people who drafted
an airport for aviation purpose.
The people who drafted that probably thought, well, it just goes without saying, it's an airport. But the worst part of this is there's a list of the things that you can do without breaching this provision. And the last thing is the loophole, or activities that are consistent with the airport lease for the airport and the final master plan for the airport. So, and then if you get an approved master plan that allows you to do stuff that's got nothing to do with operating the airport as an airport. I mean, let's get build some DFOs because someone wants to sell some clothes made by slaves in third world countries. Let's build some offices to fill with people who could be in offices anywhere doing anything that's got nothing to do with the airport. Let's build a whole bunch of warehouses that have got nothing to do with the operation of the airport. If it's in the master plan, then the argument it is, well, it's consistent with the master plan. So the fundamental flaw in this legislation that's being exploited is the master planning process, and it should be incumbent on the department administering this legislation and the minister responsible to be approving and not approving master plans to achieve the objects of the Act.
Absolutely.
To achieve the objects of the Act. And reducing the length of a runway that's been there for decades and was built with the blood, sweat and tears of my grandparents' generation is not a development, it's a degradation.
But let's also look at what's going on, Clinton. Let's look at what's going on. They're going to shorten that runway. And I agree with you. I actually think that you can look at the vast majority of Australia's privatised airports and you can arrive at a very clear conclusion that the development that's been going on for the past 20 years is incredibly incompatible. It has resulted in eroding aviation capability. In many cases, it's created aviation safety hazards and risks, which it shouldn't be creating at all. But more importantly, let's look at what's going on. How is it that we have this situation where the taxpayer owns these airports? We own them. They're ours. The land's ours. These people are rental tenants. It's like having a rental tenant come into your house and just decide, I don't like the backyard, I'm going to develop a set of units in the backyard. I mean, oh yeah, okay, mate, go for it. What? And this is nuts, but it's worse. It's worse. Have a look at Canberra. They're building business parks, and who do you think is leasing all the business properties? The federal government. Commonwealth government departments and agencies are paying astronomical rents to rent buildings on Commonwealth land owned by the taxpayer. We privatised these airports to put them in the hands of corporates who then rent them back to the very Commonwealth that issued the lease. This is nuts. This is like the big furphy of the states constantly bringing in third-party corporates to, we're going to build a highway. We're going to get a company to build a highway because the state government says, we can't afford to build it. If the government builds it, it'll cost us 2 times what it would cost a commercial company to build it. So we're going to privatise it. Okay, that's a great idea. Privatised company can build it for half of what the government can build it for. But then you provide them a contract where they can earn a 12 times multiple return in tolls. So the taxpayer, the ratepayer, the Australian public are paying colossally multiplications into the ridiculous figures for these public assets. And who's winning? Commonwealth's not winning. Taxpayers not winning. Corporates are winning. Now, how is it? I'll give you another example of this. Bankstown Airport. Bankstown Airport, owned by the people of Australia. New South Wales Police come along and say, we need to put a police air wing at Bankstown Airport to house all of our aviation. And Sydney Metro Airport sits back going, you beauty, you beauty. They built them a facility out there. And I've heard that the police air wing are paying $20-something thousand a day to lease a hangar for the New South Wales Air Arm. I mean, this is nuts. We privatised off these assets so that we could then go and rent them back. This is nuts. Well, I mean, the whole thing is just, I called it out the other day. I said, this is the greatest wealth transfer scheme to take something of value that belongs to the Australian people and to give it to a select group of corporate individuals or superannuation funds. In the case of Bankstown Airport, I understand that Aware Super is the super fund for the New South Wales Parliament and a whole bunch of others. It's just, Clinton, it's crazy. And it's hard at times to look at it and to say, this is just incompetence. It's hard at times not to look at it and go, I'm connecting a few dots here. This looks like it was pretty well organised.
Yeah, well, as I said, the circumstances in which at least Canberra was privatised without a comprehension of the potential of the land and what could happen to it is at least the product of just mule stupid bureaucracy. At least, I mean, that's the best I can put it, because it's just such a monumentally bad deal for civil aviation. Remember, this is supposed to be for the benefit of civil aviation in Australia. It's a bad deal for civil aviation in Australia. Even the RPT operators into Canberra are arguing up about the fees. A while back, a Qantas jet diverted into Canberra, had to divert in at short notice. The airport then proceeded to park a car behind the aircraft to prevent it pushing back until the use of the airport without notice fee had been paid, which I think was something like $18,000. Pick a number.
It's not. I think it's not only had an impact on the aviation industry, the consumers across Australia are picking up the bill for this nonsense. This whole privatisation thing has just been a diabolical disaster. And I just reflect on the Victorian government, which have finally woken up and realised, hey, privatising power generation in Victoria has just been, again, an unmitigated disaster. It's resulted in driving up the cost of energy to record levels. And now the Andrews government are saying, okay, it's actually time for us to renationalise and start taking these assets back or buying them back and getting back into the game and sorting this mess out. And I actually, I'm sure we can have a much more substantive airports conversation, and I certainly would be welcoming more of you in these live broadcasts, Clinton, to talk on the issue of airports. But I can't see any solution other than renationalising.
Yeah. I do have one piece of good news, and that is in the airports regulations, it says that the following kinds of subleases of an airport lease are prohibited. And one of the prohibited things is a sublease of premises within the airport site for prostitution. So there you go. And prostitution is defined. So we can sleep sound at night knowing that the airport operators are not allowed at least to do one thing clearly, and that's to sublease premises within the airport site for
Clinton, I'm not sure how many airports are subleasing to prostitution businesses, but I am absolutely confident in saying the airports have become experts at screwing aviation as market professionals. So this issue will certainly need more conversation, and I'm going to be dragging you into that a fair bit. There's a couple of other issues I'd like to throw some questions and some commentary to tonight. Let's dive into the issue of medical reform. Before I kick off in throwing those questions at you, just before we started the broadcast this evening, I raised a point with you. I said that the video that I had produced this past week had an interesting comment posted to it. And I want to talk a little bit about that with everybody, because I think it's a really relevant conversation. And that is Dr. Jeremy Robinson, who has been a member of AOPA Australia and participated on the Part 67 Technical Working Group, put a comment up on Facebook saying, I just wanted to extend and elaborate a little bit on the issues that Ben raised. And he explained that AOPA had in fact nominated Dr. Robinson to participate in the technical working group as our representative. Now, Jeremy is correct. We did in fact nominate to CASA that Dr. Jeremy Robinson, who, by the way, was already participating on that panel, and we had the opportunity to say, well, okay, look, if he's on the panel, we'll nominate him to be our AOPA representative. However, I want everybody to understand the facts. I think it's actually very important that we get facts extremely clear. And the facts on this are, when this technical working group was being spoken about in the back rooms, before it was actually formally announced, we were having a conversation with CASA, and I was having a conversation with CASA about getting an AOPA representative onto that working group. And I requested to personally participate in that working group. Now, the reason I did that is that I don't believe there would be anybody in Australia who would be a more fierce and solid advocate on that working group for obtaining the reforms that this industry desperately needs to take us forward for RPL and PPL medical reform. I have, over the past 6 years, participated in a very broad range of conversations on this issue. I have personally handled many. I've lost count of how many AOPA member pilot medical cases I have personally been involved in, and I have personally advocated with and worked with our DAMEs who are on the board of AOPA to get resolution to them. I have been in receipt of thousands of emails from pilots right across the country talking about AVMED issues. Everywhere I travel, everywhere I go, people talk to me about AVMED issues. I doubt that there is another person in this aviation industry at this time that would have that experience that I have now gained courtesy of this membership and this association. So I felt at the time I would be a fantastic representative for our membership and for our association. And I believe so because I don't take shit. I don't like bullshit. And I want to get straight to the point of getting the reform done. I'm like so many in the industry, we're sick of the pontificating and the round circle discussions and the nonsense conferences and crap that gets associated with it. We need action. Now, what was I told? I was told, not a chance in hell, it ain't going to happen. And it was clear that CASA did not want a representative on that panel who would speak up for themselves, someone who would speak the truth of the industry, someone who would refuse to be bullied into a situation where they kowtowed to the technical working group or so on and so forth. And so that's what I was told. I was told you can't participate. Only DAMEs are allowed to participate. Now, that's what we were told. And our board records show this. We were told only DAMEs are allowed to participate. So you may nominate a DAME. Now, in the end, we didn't even get a chance to nominate our own DAME. We were asked to nominate Dr. Jeremy Robinson because he was already on the panel, and they were aware that he was a member of AOPA, and we were told that's what we had to do. So did we nominate Dr. Jeremy Robinson because Dr. Jeremy Robinson was the advocate we wanted on behalf of our membership? The answer is no. And I mean no offense, insult, or malice towards Dr. Jeremy Robinson, who I hold a high regard for. I really like Dr. Jeremy Robinson. I think he does a great job in our industry. And this is in no way impugning him at all. But he was not the first choice. We were bullied into a situation. We had no choice but just to accept that outcome. And what did we learn? We learned in short succession, Clinton, that, guess what? You don't have to be a DAME to participate, because they invited Matt Boutell, Chief Executive Officer of RAOS, to participate, because he's very important on deciding what general aviation pilots are going to get for med reform as the Chief Executive of a private self-administration, as I like to call them, CASA Proprietary Limited, right? The budget cut-down version of CASA in the private commercial world. He was invited to come participate because who better to decide that GA pilots can't have med reform than RAOs themselves, who had form in this space, advocating and pushing against these reforms and stopping it happening years beforehand. So we were pretty damn angry with it. It was not an outcome that I believe was representative of CASA openly consulting with industry, which is why when CASA talks these big stories about how well they consult with the industry, I can just fall back on evidence and truth and fact and say, well, that's just garbage. They don't openly consult with industry. They manipulate the whole time. And then they, at the end of the process, like to play games with it. So he put a submission up. He said that he was nominated. He is technically correct, but that is exactly what happened with it. Now, I'm not upset with Dr. Jeremy Robinson. I want to make that clear, and you can see the smile on my face. And I will say it again, I have a lot of respect for Jeremy, a lot of time for him, and this in no way impugns Dr. Jeremy Robinson for the good work that he does for our industry. So over to you, Clinton.
Yeah, well, I think as we've discussed before, I mean, the whole review structure is just a farce. I mean, it didn't need to have a panel of people, mainly damies, asking, well, how important are we to the safety of air navigation? It's just a bunch of people with a patent conflict of interest. As you say, they're probably very good doctors and very nice people and all that, but it's no different from having a technical working group comprised entirely of pilots. Everyone would say, of course, pilots don't want to. This is supposed to be done on the basis of objective evidence. And you don't need to be a DAME or whatever. You need to be someone who can obtain objective evidence and make dispassionate judgments about the risks created by that objective evidence. And that's what should happen, but that's not how they work. I mean, look what's happened with colour vision deficiency again. So they're biased. They've gone out, they actively look for evidence to support their prejudices. So, you know, punching the eye.
Can we just make a point on that CVD issue as well? That CASA announced it was adopting the New Zealand reform. It made clear it was adopting the New Zealand reform. It walked forward. It started. It then stopped. It has made no formal announcement to this industry, and it has not actually formally announced that they've stopped adhering to this reform, but they have stopped. They have parked it, and now they've decided they're not happy with that. They want to do something different. And yet again, we just have another great example of the CASA machine falling over itself to complicate an issue, and to do something that damages the aviation industry, damages the pilot community, damages their own credibility. I mean, and this is the other thing that at Clinton, I get astounded with. It's almost like they are determined to destroy their own credibility and to create as much mistrust and to create such a chasm between the industry and themselves as they're capable of doing at times. It's just nuts.
Well, they don't care about us. They don't care about the fact that we see through it, and I see through it all. They're sitting there safe in the sound of knowledge that the travelling public out there think they're doing a great job. They think it's like a little bit like ASIC. There's so much things in aviation these days is just a facade. The members of the public think that CASA AvMed are producing little supermen and little superwomen or whatever gender you want, and they're the only people that can fly aeroplanes. And so they are protecting the travelling public from carnage caused by unfit pilots. So that they're sitting comfortably knowing that is the misconception out there. And this again is something that, getting back to the point about how we can try to shift things, is to try to educate members of the public. And the number of conversations that I have with members of the public about let's talk about AvMed, and you say, do you know that when you're in an aircraft, you could be flying in an RPT jet, you could be flying in airspace that is not controlled by air traffic control. And I had this quite recently with a friend of my partner's, and no, that's not true. And I said, you could be sharing airspace with an aircraft that's not certified by CASA, being flown by someone who doesn't have a medical certificate by CASA. No, that's not true. And fortunately, this person's partner is in the aviation industry. So she looked at him and he nodded. And this person just couldn't believe that goes on nearly all day, every day. And I've always said, and so we have this, for some reason, we've got this, that's okay. But suddenly, if you want to fly this kind of aeroplane, it's the same way, but it's got VH on the tail. You need, and trying to explain to members of the public these things is part of what we've got to do as well, because we've got to get them on our side. Because, as I said, they're thinking that CASA AvMed's the last bastion between aviation carnage. That was the messianic view of Professor Navathi when he was PMO. He said it, it's the medical certificate that decides whether someone can fly or not, and this is
their training that actually decides that.
Yeah, but with CVD, I know I have inside knowledge. It's because they actively looked for evidence to confirm their prejudice. Oh, we've just found a study, or we've just found this, and that's not being dispassionate medical practitioner, bringing professional independence to a job. I've got this
Clinton,
prejudice.
just about every other industry you can think of has been reformed over the last 25 years to recognise that people with disabilities and people with impairments are able to function. They're able to participate. It seems like CASA is the last organisation in the world to come to the reality that, people can actually fly airplanes if their vision's not perfect. People can fly airplanes if they have diabetes. People can actually fly airplanes if they've had cancer and they're recovering. People can actually fly airplanes even if they've had a cardiovascular event. People can still fly airplanes. It's like these people have not moved past 1950 and haven't come to realise we're living in 2022, soon to become 2023. And the thing that I find so frustrating with this, Clinton, is that here is our Director of Aviation Safety just a day ago publishing a newsletter saying we're going to have vertiports and we've got electric air taxis and we're at the forefront and we're one of the world's best regulators and we're forging the way forward. This is a regulator that can't even fix medical reform. This is a regulator that hasn't even been able to look to the world's most successful aviation economy to go on, okay, they've done it. They did it successfully. It's safe. Let's get on with it. They're still stuck in the quagmire of their own ridiculous thinking, and yet they're marketing in their newsletters that they're going to lead the world on electric eVTOL vertiports. I mean, I honestly feel sorry for the eVTOL world. If these poor bastards in the electric aeroplane space have any clue whatsoever, their aircraft will never leave the ground, because CASA will never get this together in the next 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. And even if they do get it together, can you imagine what they're going to deliver? It'll be a mess. And this is the problem, is that this is a regulator that has never squared away its own backyard. It's almost like it's just dropped the things it doesn't know how to fix. And now it's going to run on and quickly start marketing that we've got, look over here, guys, electric eVTOL. Don't look over there at the thousands of pilots we've forced out of aviation without any real reason. Don't look at the thousands of people we've discriminated against. Don't look at the thousands of people whom we've ruined their aviation experience. Don't look at the thousands of people who we're forced to sell airplanes because we got Cessna SIDS wrong and we told the world that we were the world leader and we knew more than the US. Oh shit, sorry, we've had to roll that back because we got it wrong. Sorry about all those airplanes that now got sold out of the country and were destroyed because we imposed regulation we got wrong. Oh, sorry about that. This is what frustrates me. Their track record is one of a horse that's lost every race it's ever entered, and they have no recognition for the fact that they've done so much damage to this industry already, and yet they look at us as industry associations and they say things like, Ben Morgan, you're just so unreasonable in saying these things. It's so unfair of you. I can't believe you would say that publicly. Well, at what point do we start saying, hey, CASA, if you want to be safe, you need to start speaking some truth. If you want to be safe, you need to acknowledge what you've actually messed up and start fixing it.
Yeah, well, I'm aware, tragically, of cases of suicide, young boys who are told, well, you've got your colour vision deficiency means that you can never live your dream of being a jumbo pilot. And when all of the evidence shows that pilots with colour vision deficiency are as competent, when they're trained properly, are as competent and as safe as people without colour vision deficiency. That's what all the objective evidence says. But it's an industry. CVD's an industry. People make money out of CAD tests and all of this sort of stuff. And there's all of these studies that are going on. And I've said it before, again, another manifestation of this. Used to be when you went into your DAME to get your medical examination, you could tick a box whether you agreed to use information from your examination to be used in studies. That box is no longer there. It's by submitting the application, you consent to that happening. Now, that's not consent, that's duress. I've got no choice. If I want to fly my plane, I've got to get my medical certificate. I've got no choice. But whether my information is used in studies or not has got nothing to do with my objective compliance or otherwise with the medical standard. Either I do or I don't. And I should be able to say, no, I don't want my data to be used in your studies. Where I call us the guinea pig class, where they're guinea pigs, they're studying us. And that, again, is so many examples of AVMED overreach, where they wake up one day and say, well, they shouldn't get the choice. Let's pretend that they consent by putting in their application. That is duress. That is not consent.
We're going to be catching up with Paul Rushton, who's joined the board. He's actually new treasurer for AOPA Australia. And Paul has a very personal story on how AVMED set about removing his ability to fly. And Paul was one of those cases where I got involved in that fight. He was at his wit's end with it. And, we went to Canberra and we lobbied and we spoke directly with them. And, I was blown away at how CASA behaved. I saw it firsthand for one of the, for lack of a better description. I sat in this meeting and we're talking about how he's perfectly fit to fly. He should be allowed to fly. And they sat in the meeting and they said, no, I'm sorry. We're just not going to let you fly. We're not going to no. And they were adamant. There is no way under the Class 2 system you can go back to flight. We're sorry, it can't be done. And then Tony Stanton, a CASA employee, sat in that meeting and then started selling him an RAOS membership. I mean, I shit you not, right? I shit you not. A CASA employee sat in an AVMED resolution meeting and then on the whiteboard drew up all these options and continued to say, your best course is go join RAOS. We support you to join RAOS and you can keep flying, fly for RAOS, and good luck to you. And I'm sitting in the meeting thinking, I can't even believe they've done this in front of me. I mean, it was like, talk about free material, that a CASA employee was using an AVMED resolution meeting to pitch to this person that the solution here is just join RAOS and we never have to see you again. And just think of the logic. I had the PMO sitting there saying, I'm really sorry, but with your condition, we consider you to be a risk to aviation safety. And then right next to her is Tony Stanton saying, oh, but we'd be happy if you go fly an RAOS aircraft, same aeroplane, same airspace, same airport, just pay our friends at RAOS some money and you're safe. What bullshit. Bullshit.
You couldn't make it up, because that story just goes to show how far what I call the corporate integrity of CASA has deteriorated. That person thought that it was appropriate to do that in that sort of set of circumstances.
And he's still working for him, mate. I don't know. Honestly, Clinton, Tony Stanton's probably going to see this and he's going to go, you're an arsehole, Ben Morgan. No, I'm not, mate. You shouldn't be working for CASA. You should not be using your position to pitch a sale to the RAOs. It's wrong. It's wrong on so many levels. And this is part of the problem. They've gotten away with this type of behaviour for so long, and it's been hidden. No one's seen it. No one speaks up for it. No one calls them out. I'm trying to do that. I'm copping a lot of heat for it. Probably going to get assassinated one night. Everyone's going to go, what's happened to Ben? He got done. Right? But the realities are it needs to be called out. It should have been shut down decades ago, this type of crap. It needed to have been sorted out internally. I don't envy poor Pip Spence in this role. People say, oh, but Ben, you've turned, you don't like her. I actually really do like Pip Spence. I really do like her. She's a nice person, but she is the captain of the SS Titanic. This thing is going down. It is going down. It ain't going to float. It's got more holes in it than a colander. And every level you look at that organisation, it's just sinking. And it's sad because its credibility shot, its function shot. It's out there desperately trying to look like a regulator that's capable of doing something. And they just keep messing everything up. I mean, it's sad. It really is sad.
Yeah. Well, because the geek I am, I've been watching the hearings of the Robodebt Royal Commission, and it's very, very interesting. And there's going to be some really big, ugly findings out of that Royal Commission. I can see it. The Royal Commissioner is very, very sharp and is onto the issues. But as I'm watching it, I'm reminded of AvMed's modus operandi. And what's AvMed's modus operandi? And I've made this presentation before of the couple of times in which I've successfully pulled up AvMed for doing unlawful things. The first was imposing a purported restriction on my medical certificate called for CASA audit. And I bailed them up and took them to the AAT. But before they got there, they said, yes, you're right. That cannot lawfully be put on your medical certificate. And so they took it off. But 2 years later, they issued another one with the same thing on there and had to do it again. And they kept doing it with everyone else. So what they do is whatever the hell they like. And every now and then, some pipsqueak will pull them up and take them on, and they'll just fix it in that case, but continue doing it with everyone else deliberately. Now, I call that's within my definition of corruption. Not all corruption is bags of cash being handed by someone to an official or a politician to get something done. I say when public officials are deliberately breaching the law because it's in the way of their noble cause, I call that corruption. So let me send this message, and I've got one more example. Anyone out there who has the purported restriction for CASA audit on their medical certificate, that has been unlawfully imposed. Not my opinion. That's in a letter written to me by CASA Legal. So if you've got it, write to CASA and say, get that shit off my medical certificate. The second thing I pulled them up with was they wrote me a letter suspending my medical certificate, saying you're suspended for 12 months and doesn't matter what you do in between now and then, we are not going to give you your medical certificate back for 12 months. That is unlawful. Refusing to consider to lift the suspension or reissue during the period. That is unlawful. Not my opinion. That's what the AAT found and told them. And as a consequence of that, and the medical report that said that CASA's decision was based on pseudoscience, so Australia's foremost expert in the area said that CASA's decision was based on pseudoscience, magically I got my certificate back. But do you think they stopped sending letters to other people saying your certificate's suspended for X months or whatever, and we're not going to even entertain lifting the suspension in that period? No, they kept on with it, kept on doing it. So every now and then, this is what was happening with Robodebt. Every now and then, some pipsqueak would have the temerity to take them on. The first, I think it was the second witness that was there on Tuesday, was told, you owe us $4,000. and then they got the debt recovery thugs onto this poor person. And she went to legal aid, went to the federal court. Magically, just before the federal court hearing, the debt was put to zero, and the Commonwealth said, well, now these proceedings have no utility because there's no longer any argument. You see? Now, fortunately, someone else told them on, but this is AVMED's MO. We'll do whatever the hell we like, and every now and then someone will take us on, and if there's a risk of us being embarrassed and exposed, we'll back down just in their
Clinton,
case.
I've seen it firsthand. I've seen them do it firsthand. This is not, like, I hope people realise what you're saying. I have seen them do firsthand. I have also seen Casa Legal with this same attitude. We'll pull it on, and if someone comes along and really stumps up a hard challenge, okay, we'll change direction. But the average person, they're going to be scared and they're going to be frightened, and we're going to steamroll them, and we're going to get our man. We're going to get our person.
Well,
and it's wrong. This regulator needs cleaning up, and it's, I think this last 2 weeks, it's probably marked a notable change in what I'm saying on camera and the way I'm saying it on camera, because it's at a point now where I actually don't believe they're capable of fixing this themselves. It needs to become a major political issue. It needs to become a major people issue. The only way this is going to be resolved is brute force. It's not going to happen easily. And I just think that it's sad that they've put themselves in this situation, because they've had every opportunity to try and fix these issues and to work with industry and to show this country and to show the people of Australia and show the aviation industry that they have credibility. It seems they're determined to impress upon everyone how little credibility they genuinely have. And I actually think it's immensely sad. So, Clinton, we're going to finish on AVMED, and I'm going to just thump into the last issue. I'm just mindful of time, but our conversation's flowing here at the moment. I want to keep it going. Just closing off on the AVMED, I said to Dr. Jeremy Robinson in a response, and I just think it really succinctly it ties up the AOPA position here beautifully, and it states the following: we maintain the view that the ongoing delays and the draconian nonsense really has to stop. It's time for this to be fixed. We are clear in our minds that a pilot's medical fitness is a relationship between a pilot and his or her own doctor who knows them best, not some government bureaucrat or government medico who has never met them, never treated them, and doesn't understand the situation in terms of first person. Our industry is not here to keep AVMED employed. Neither are we here to keep the aviation medical business community in work. Now, I don't know if I can say it any more succinctly than that. We are not here to keep government people in a job. We're not here even to keep the aviation medical fraternity in a job or keep their businesses moving. If it's safe for us to fly self-declared, as it's now been proven immensely through what's happened with the RAOs and through the reforms abroad in the UK and in the US, then guess what? We in this country deserve those reforms. We don't deserve any less. We are the people of Australia. Our government is supposedly here to reflect our wants, our needs. We're not here to be saluting a government who's going to tell us how we're all going to live our lives. For some reason, these people in Canberra have gotten the wrong idea. They think they're actually in charge. They get to tell you whatever they like, and you just have to put up with it. That's actually not the way it works. And I tell you what, while ever my ass sits in the seat it does at AOPA, I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to fight it with every inch of me to make it happen, because it should have happened years ago. There's been too many people discriminated against for too long. And it's quite sad to see the destruction that's been wrought on the industry over such a simple issue that could have been fixed. So I think we're on the same page there, Clinton. Appreciate your views on it. And again, I'm really looking forward to working with you on the advocacy on that one. Righto, the 3 A's we spoke about earlier tonight: airports, AVMED, and that other unbloody holy god of a mess, the damn ASIC card. Rather than me blur into it, I mean, what's your thoughts on this thing? I mean, we obviously do need an aviation security program for commercial aviation, but private aviation certainly, and recreational aviation, it can't have been the intent of the Act to capture private recreational pilots in this bloody mess. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, my point is, I wouldn't mind so much if, one, the process wasn't so ridiculous, and two, it actually produced a substantive outcome in the real world. Now, I've spent a lot of time biting my lips on not explaining publicly the patent flaws and gaps in the system, because my fear is, if I explain them, the natural response of the bureaucracy will be to say, well, in that case, we need more laws and we need more technology and we need more restrictions to deal with that, which is not the right response, because that won't work either. But again, people won't believe me in the public when I say, but it's true, is I can fly down to Black Mountain Tower outside controlled airspace, call Canberra Tower, get an inbound clearance, and I do this all the time, and air traffic control doesn't know who I am, doesn't know if I have a pilot's license, doesn't know if the aircraft has an airworthiness certificate, don't know whether I have an ASIC. And in 36 years of flying into Canberra, which spans the introduction of the ASIC, I have been asked for my ASIC on arrival precisely 0 times. 0. Now, if someone with bad intent wants to do that, then they're going to do it. And if they want to crash their plane into the Prime Minister's aircraft or 34 Squadron, they're going to do it. And even if they announced that their intention to do it, what's going to happen? There are no surface-to-air missile sites on Mount Ainslie and Mount Majura and all that sort of stuff. So it is something that has so many big holes in it that I don't see the point. The other point of it is the 2-yearly insult to my intelligence and integrity, where I served for 20 years in the Defence Force with a high level of security clearance, working on fighter jets, working on the Prime Minister's and the Governor General's aircraft. They trusted me to do it. And I maintained a very high level security clearance after I left the Defence Force and worked on the Super Hornet project and various big defence projects. But when it comes to this thing, they spot that, your dad's name, when you were born 61 years ago, is different to your name now. And they said, that's because my mum and dad divorced when I was a little kid. But I entered the Defence Force at the age of 15 with that name. Every passport I've ever had, for the whole time, during all of that, this has been my name. But no, this process has found out that I'm a secret spy, having been under a pseudonym since the age of 7, and they've identified me, and they're going to sort that out. And it's just, again, you couldn't make this stuff up unless you were inside the bureaucracy, where I'm sure it all makes perfect sense. And I'm over it. I'm really, really over the waste of time and energy that it takes. All it does is inconvenience the law-abiding. That's all it does. Not going to stop the bad guys.
There's been a lot of arguments put up by the aviation industry on this ASIC card over the 6 years that I've been with AOPA. I've heard it all. I've heard the issue of the costs. I've heard the issue of the impost of having to apply for it. Of course, it's gone through a secondary phase of regulation change that now requires even more stringent controls put in place on all of this. I'm yet to see any evidence from the government whatsoever that private pilots or recreational pilots have ever been the target risk category that all of this is in relation to. It is clear that they're concerned with baggage handlers. It's clear that they're concerned with persons who are accessing and working on commercial aircraft. It is clear they are really concerned with persons who have access to security areas around large commercial airports. I just can't imagine that this card was ever designed to stop Bill and Ben flying the Bonanza out the back of Walker or any other of the myriad of regional country airstrips that we have in this country. It just defies logic. What's also clear in the feedback that I've received back is that councils, largely the council-run aerodromes and the privatised aerodromes, don't actually understand the ASIC card properly themselves. The ASIC card is supposedly there for if you are accessing safety sensitive areas at the airport, but instead airport operators just apply it as a blanket and say, no, the whole airport. But that's actually not what the regulations say. The regulations say that an airport just needs to have its aviation safety areas demarcated, and in those areas you have to have and display an ASIC card. So you could use the rest of the airport and not have to go near that part of the airport, and you don't need to be part of this ridiculous program. But they aren't interested in understanding what the regulations are. They go for the path of least resistance, which is just to say, put it across the whole aerodrome, then we don't have to think about it. And of course, the aviation industry suffers. And it's just a joke. I had somebody called me up a couple of days ago and they said, here, get this situation. You're going to love it. It's hilarious. They're applying for an ASIC card. They're waiting for the ASIC card to be processed, and they needed to visit an ASIC controlled aerodrome. Now, the law states that you can call the ARO. You can call the ARO and say, I've arrived and I don't have an ASIC card and I need to be escorted. And they're like, no, you need to have an ASIC card. Well, that's actually not what the regulations state. That's actually not what the regulations state. No. And he fought with the pilot until he tells the pilot, you have to get on your way, but I have to get fuel. No, you can't get out of the airplane. You've got to go. This is the absurdity, is that the government hasn't even educated the airports as to how this program actually works. They've left it to everyone to interpret. The bush lawyering's got involved in this thing. It's just turned into a diabolical mess. And, you know, you've just got to reflect back on this one argument. We haven't had people using aircraft like it was used in the United States. We haven't had any of that. Yet we've knee-jerked and we've put up, you know, barbed wire fences and, you know, really ridiculous security where we have these gates everywhere and the codes are written on the gates because people keep forgetting the codes, and it's just, you know, even the airport recognizes it can't control. I mean, it's just a farce. It's security. It's the image of security when there's no security at all. It's just, it's such a farce.
Now they'll argue that we don't know how much this is prevented and how many bad guys have been detected. But even that, you know, they might say Clinton McKenzie might get so bad, he turned a criminal, turned a crime. He's so angry about this stuff. And they decide not to issue me with an ASIC. Well, so what? That's not going to stop me flying into Canberra. I mean, that's my point. I mean, it's really about security of aviation and me not flying into Canberra, then me not being issued with an ASIC card is not going to stop that happening. Anyone can fly into Canberra and ask for an inbound clearance, and air traffic control will give them an inbound clearance. And air traffic control doesn't know whether the person's got an ASIC or not. They don't even know who the person is. I've gone through this exercise again, trying to educate members of the public. Go, look, I haven't even put a flight plan in. We're going flying. Oh, when are you going to tell the air traffic control tower? There is no air traffic control tower here. Have you put in a flight plan? No. We're just going to go flying. We're going to enjoy the sights. We're in civilization here. I've got emergency locator beacon. I can transmit. Oh, well, why don't we pop in over to Canberra? Well, won't the, you know, and you just say, ring up the tower from Black Mountain and get an airways clearance. And I say, they don't know who I am. They don't know who I am. They don't know who you are. They don't know what I've got on board. They don't care. And so it's that part of it that just messes with my head, because me being detected as a risk and not getting an ASIC isn't going to stop me flying into Canberra. It's just,
well, I guess, you know, Clinton, it's exactly the same as if you go out and you go to certain parts of Australia. Pilots have given up bothering about medicals. In many cases, pilots have given up about registering aircraft. Pilots have, in some cases, even given up getting a license and just do it anyway. It's crazy the number of people that I've spoken to over the years where they've admitted it and they've gone, Ben, I don't even bother anymore, and they're not out this way. The truth of the situation is CASA have very, very little boots left on the ground. All of their budget is being consumed by these super highly paid executive management team and their super highly paid upper middle level management team. I mean, it's eye-watering how much money these people are pulling out of that CASA budget. So there's no money left for people to be out there. And the truth of the reality is they've become they're a regulator on paperwork, and just the conscientious objectors in the industry saying, well, stuff these guys, I'm going to keep out of their way. And it's probably why CASA was so desperate to get ADS-B implemented. They probably, were desperate to know how many aircraft were really flying out there. And I think we'd be frightened to know how many people are flying now where they're just saying, I'm not going to comply. I'm not going to bother it. It's just, I don't need to worry about that.
Well, hopefully they put the budget aside for the vertiport regulations, because we've got to get that done,
Well, we should maybe end on vertiports, and I've been laughing my ass off all day. I did that broadcast, and someone said to me later on, "Were you really angry when you did the broadcast?" And I said, "No, I was actually laughing. I was pissing myself laughing, actually, because I couldn't believe that they put out that communication. I thought it must have been like the 1st of April or something. It's not. But I was on the tug and it was very windy and I was yelling, and it might have sounded like I wasn't really that angry. I was more or less just taking time out of my day to go walk up to a helipad with a camera, having just read this absolute nonsense. I mean, it is nonsense. Vertiports. Without vertiports, there will be no air taxi. Well, no, let me tell you another staggering fact. Without the reforms we should have adopted from the United States 10, 15 years ago, Australia today has no air taxi. We could have air taxi already in Australia. We could have small aircraft being used for air taxi. We can have medium-sized aircraft being used for air taxi. We can even have corporate jets being used for air taxi. We can't do it. Why? Because CASA have been thoroughly incapable of simply adopting what the rest of the world have done safely, and what they've done that's unlocked their economy. And here we are reading this newsletter that says, without vertiports, there'll be no air taxi. No, I've got some great news for everyone. There'll be no air taxi because CASA's incapable. CASA are incompetent. They can't get it done. And it's just so sad, Clinton. It is so sad that we have to say these things. It is terrible that we have to say these things. But what an indictment. What an indictment that they're out there talking. And just keep this in perspective. For everybody who might watch this, you might disagree. Just keep this in perspective. There is not a single VH registered electric air taxi in this country. There is not one aircraft on the civil register today. There is not one electric air taxi that has FAR 23 certification. There is not one air taxi that is at least 3 years away from being flown commercially. And CASA, instead of finishing off med reform, instead of finishing off Part 43 harmonisation, instead of finishing off flight training industry reform, instead of finishing off the charter industry reforms, instead of finishing off a cadre of reform, it's busy creating a new division within CASA so we can have vertiports. And so don't worry, guys, don't worry. The destruction of general aviation is imminent, but we'll have vertiports all over the place. They'll be awesome.
It's going to be great. Awesome. It's going to be great. But we should stop talking, Ben, because I suspect viewers will have lost the will to live by now. I think we've been going on for about half an hour longer than we programmed. So
that's okay, mate.
There's probably no one left.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much, Clinton, for your time. Obviously, there'll be many more people that get to watch this offline than they do get to see it online and live. But we do obviously thank everybody for tuning in, both live and offline later on. If you do want to connect with AOPA Australia, specifically if you'd like to reach out and contact the organisation so that you can raise a conversation with any of our directors, not just myself, it might be wanting to raise a conversation with Clinton, feel free, send us an email at ceo@aopa.com.au. More than happy to forward those on to Clinton where necessary. Become part of the organisation. this is your association. We're fighting for you. We're fighting for every single person across the aviation industry for a better general aviation industry than we have today, one more prosperous and sustainable than it is currently. And so that's what we're here doing. We certainly want you to be involved. Don't hesitate. Pick up the digital pen, type out that email, make contact. More than happy to have you involved. So thank you again, Clinton, for joining AOPA as one of our new directors. Very much looking forward to working with you. And I hope that you'll be joining our members online for a host of continuing conversation on a whole range of issues. So thank you so much.
Sure. And safe flying, everyone.
Okay. And with that, Ben Morgan from AOPA, if you do appreciate everything we do here at AOPA for you out there in the industry, why don't you jump online to aopa.com.au/membership, become a member. It is $159 to join AOPA Australia and to stand with us and support us as we push for these critical reforms. After all, if we're not out there fighting for you, who exactly is fighting for you? There's very few people out there that are actually brave enough in many cases to stand up and speak the truth on these issues. And here we are, we're doing it for you Monday through to Friday. You don't have to agree with everything that we say, but certainly your support will go a great distance in helping give the association the resources it needs to maintain the fight for a better industry. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you next